Okay.
Okay.
22 years ago, in 1991, you, I, Mark Dresser, and Marilyn Crispell recorded here in Willisau, first without an audience and then in performance for a production released on Ad Art Records. That was definitely one of the more significant representations of the quartet at that time. Can you speak briefly to this place we are today and its personal historical significance to you?
I feel that Nicholas and Els Troxler have done great work on the same level as the musicians who have come here for the last 39 years. We talked last night about how one person can make a difference. And the Troxlers have most certainly made a difference. And I think I have had something like 9 or 10 opportunities over the last 39 years to come to Willisau. And so I have a deep love and respect for Nicholas and Jens Troxler. And I feel that the Willisau Festival especially is a very important festival. It is a festival that is run on the highest level. The men and women who have made this possible, many of them are not being paid. They have come because of their love and concern for creativity and creative music. The organization treats the musicians in such a respectful way. And after 39 years, I kind of feel like I'm part of the family of Willisau. I mean, I have seen these people at different points in my life. And now at 68 years old, looking at my life, I feel especially grateful that I've had an opportunity to meet people of such high caliber and to have them as friends, part of my extended family. And so I remember that concert that the quartet did and the recording. And for me, those experiences are part of the bright moments of my life. And for my musical work, Willisau has helped me on so many different levels, giving musicians like myself opportunities to actually perform. As you know, for the music that we play, you have to actually go into the real world and play it, as opposed to academia, which in many cases glorifies theory, because the professors have never really put themselves in the middle of the music. And so that Willisau would give us opportunities. And the quartet also had opportunities to play in other parts of Switzerland. And so I think of it as part of the magical and wonderful experiences that I've been fortunate enough to have. And I still listen to that music.
Me too.
And so to have the opportunity to play with you again, with Taylor Ho Bynum, I just feel grateful to the cosmic forces. If the subject is Gerry Hemingway, my viewpoint is Gerry Hemingway is one of the great master restructural, virtuoso instrumentalists, composers, and educators and scholars of this time period. And so to have you back in my space and for me to be back in your space, as far as I'm concerned, this is part of the beauty of life.
Thank you. I put my feelings exactly. Yeah, man. We come together today in place of another American master who also shares a special relationship to this festival and its history, Cecil Taylor. Can you speak briefly to the musical dimensions and vision Cecil Taylor's music brought to you, particularly at your own formative stage of becoming a musician? In essence, how did Cecil's recordings and performances in the 50s and 60s affect your early musical thinking?
The great music of Cecil Taylor has profoundly affected me and reshaped my life. In fact, I must have been around 11 years old. I had been only listening to Brubeck, Dave Brubeck, who I still listen to and still love. But I bought the Looking Ahead. Is it Looking Ahead?
Yeah, Looking Ahead is the first one.
The first one with Earl Griffin on it.
Exactly.
And I put on
Excursions
the music.
on a wobbly rail. And all
There
that.
you go.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm dealing with the scholar, so of course you know this music. And the music turned my consciousness upside down.
So when did you hear this recording for the first time?
Oh, it was 1958, 59.
It was around when it was made.
Yes,
right?
when it came out.
When it came out, you heard it.
Because I was searching, trying to understand the state of creative music and what was out there. I was drawn towards the more abstract musics, and in that period I was discovering Arnold Schoenberg and Alban Berg, and their work would become very important to me. And later I would bring in the great music of Antoine Webern. And so to hear a jazz quartet with a pianist whose voicings were so personal, so different, and in this context, working within a traditional space, he was still using tempos and this kind of thing, and the incredible work of Earl Griffith. The recording blew me away, and after that I went out and got the Coltrane Time record, which actually had another name.
We were talking about this the other day.
Into the Art. Into the Art.
No, that's a Cecil Taylor record. This is a Coltrane and a record where Coltrane and Cecil Taylor played together. At any rate, we know
and that can be put in. The way he played on Just Friends and Double Clutching with John Coltrane, I loved it. It appealed to me on many levels. Harmonically, it was extended harmonics leading into the open space. I was
also as a rhythmic counterpoint, he proposed many interesting ways in which, in terms of his comping,
Yes.
the pianist has a role of comping and accompanying the linear players, and so his role as he would comp was so interesting because it also was rhythmically charged in a way that was very abstracted from the natural inclinations and cliches of swing up to that point. So he really had a way of proposing, sort of almost disturbing in a way, the
rhythmic propulsion inside of a metric space, a kind of a pulse rhythmic propulsion in that metric space was totally fresh. And his music just kind of opened me up to the state of the state in terms of the new action space that was trans-harmonic. And then later in the 60s with unit structures and the great work that he did in that time space, he began to redefine synergies for the small ensemble. He was a part of the movement along with John Coltrane that would begin this energy surge that has never really been, in my opinion, fully examined or appreciated. But in fact, the pulse energy musics from Cecil Taylor and John Coltrane would be very unique and opened up fresh concept spaces that I'm still working through. And so Cecil Taylor has had a profound effect on me. It was the music of Cecil Taylor that that created, or at least made clear the complexities I was having with my family. My family backed away from my music because I was moving in the direction of Cecil Taylor and Arnold Coleman. I should also give credit to Dave Brubeck, another great master whose harmonic musics, whose rhythmic musics have never been looked at in a way that is respectful and insightful based on all what it is, all what he has demonstrated. And so I don't mean to move away from the great contribution of Cecil Taylor, but when I think about the early period of me growing up and listening to the music, I think about Cecil Taylor, I think about Dave Brubeck, I think about Lenny Tristano, and I think about the great Sal Mosca, whose work has never been appreciated. Meanwhile, Cecil would zoom through the time space of the 60s and 70s. I think about the first of the solo musics that he recorded. Incredible. Yes.
Amazing recording.
Amazing.
The reason that Cecil's a fascinating subject in a certain kind of way, because he does bring such his background, his interest in what was going on in the New England Conservatory, where he studied, the things that he brought into his music at an early stage do play out in these early recordings, and it relates. In my way of thinking, I noticed that his position or his entry point reflects in a way what you would go through later on, which was the incorporation of elements, a very broad set of elements that would inform your music and would give your music dimensions that weren't the usual resource points. And Cecil was an earlier example of the same sort of way of thinking. It's slightly related to the so-called third stream large group of musicians who were from Miles to Gunther Schuller to all the people who were involved in this strain of activity, John Lewis and so forth. So he had a relationship to that, and it's fascinating to me how the influences come together and how in the early stages. I see you're drawn to this, like I was drawn to it. I was always drawn to the outsider, the person who was a little bit out of the normal path. When I was a rock and roll guy, Beefheart was the person who spoke to me the loudest in the early Zappa stuff. The same thing, just like it grabbed my attention somehow and it shook my tree.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was fresh, something personal. It wasn't a commercial move. The thing about Cecil Taylor, one of the things about Cecil Taylor that always impressed and influenced me was that he did his music. He did not bow to selling out on any level. He was religious in terms of staying with his work. He practiced. He was totally dedicated. He is totally dedicated. And as a young guy, it profoundly influenced me. And again, it goes back to that quartet, Brubeck, Sal Mosca, Tristano, even Andrew Hill. Yes. Andrew Hill is another guy who, his career was not always supported in the way one would have hoped. But Andrew, for me, was another pianist who had something that was special. And these are the guys and gals who turned me on to music as a life's pursuit, as a spiritual pursuit. Whether or not I would make money, I understood by the time I was 16 or 17 that I was moving in this direction, and the gravity was just pulling me towards this direction, and that there was going to be no real money attached to this decision. In the end, this would be one of the primary barriers that we would have to all go through, dedicating ourselves to hard work and evolution and evolving our own work, knowing at the same time that when we do our best work, quite possibly we might not make any money at all. So the question was between a little money and no money. But we made the decision to go forward because we were infused with the love and excitement of the music and fresh terrains of explorative possibilities. And so we come from that group. And in a way, we're the children of Cecil Taylor and John Coltrane and Bill Dixon and all the men and women who took that extra step of separating themselves from the jazz industrial complex, separating themselves from the popular music world, separating themselves and fighting back and reacting to the miscriticism of the critical jazz community. Cecil and John Coltrane especially, but more so Cecil, were being hammered for decades about their music.
Yes, they were.
Even though everyone recognized whatever the music is, it's consistent and it's evolving, and this guy's totally dedicated, and they continue to hammer him anyway. And part of, I feel, the hard edge this hero would develop would be what was needed to protect himself from the barrage of criticism that he had to endure as part of that first generation that began to move out. I would also say, yes, Jimmy Jufrey, put Jimmy in there, because all of these people met the challenge of their generation, just as we met the challenge of our generation. They can't take that from us. We didn't make any money, but our music is documented. Our dedication is clearly there for anyone who wants to study our work. And I feel we are part of that special family of restructuralists and innovators. We walk the walk, we talk the talk, and now we're senior guys. I'm 68, and I'm still excited about the music. I still see my work as a professional, as an offering from a professional student of music, because that's all I want to be.
Right, exactly. Let me ask you a related question, maybe a bit larger in scope, but I'm interested for what you have to, and what comment you can make on this. In the culture of music, if we compare the times we grew up in, as we were just discussing, to the current environments of which music is a part, I think you and I and most of us can agree that there exists some major differences in the way music is experienced and created. Would you agree with that?
I most certainly would agree with that.
Okay, all right, that's the first part. Granted, there are also some constants. There are some things that are the same, that remain true. But to focus on what has changed or has been transformed since you became interested in music as a life, my question is, what is music now?
I feel that in the third millennium, we are most fortunate. There are so many new and fresh possibilities. Let me say this first. For the young men and women who are looking in the direction of creative music or creative anything, my viewpoint is I do not agree with the notion that the best of anything has been done and that all we can look forward to is the apocalypse, and that forward motion and restructuralism is over. I do not agree with this idea at all. Now, going back to your question, the technology has continued to consistently evolve. The Echo Mirror House musics, for example, bring in iPods with all of the compositions from my systems, with all of the recordings that I've done, and the iPods, along with a new mapping cartography notation, is an attempt to integrate some of the new toys into the music. And so how do I see creative music in this period? Creative music in this period, the possibilities are unlimited. image logic possibilities, new technologies and digital projectors. We're moving towards holography. That'll be coming into the music. From looking at this subject from a global level, we're integrating instruments from all over the place. For the performance today, the great master percussionist Gerry Hemingway has a contrabass marimba, and he's creating new instruments with water and metal bars or whatever. And so, for me, this reflects on what the state of creativity is in this time period, and I feel the possibilities will only get greater. Going back to the first part of your question, though, I feel that the decision to bring jazz into the university was a logical decision in the sense that sessions and this kind of experience had come to an end, and that the university would now start to take up the music. But that transferal was also complex. We grew up with a healthy respect for known, unknown, and intuition. But academia has fashioned the music in a way where the unknown or intuition is being pushed aside, and they're looking at 1 + 1 = 2, and teaching the last 2 and 3 generations the element fundamentals of the fifth restructural cycle bebop musics. But they're not teaching the meta reality of the musics. I'll go even further. I have come in the past 30 years to completely disagree with how we talk about the history of jazz. As far as I'm concerned, that history is a constructed history in the same way that the Harlem Renaissance was a constructed history. What am I saying? In my classes, I speak of continental experiences, territorial experiences. No one ethnic group owns creative music. No one ethnic group has determined the forward thrust of the music. The forward thrust of the music has come about because men and women in different areas of the continent have come together, and music has come out of that.
Don't you think economics plays a huge role in how people found each other and found their musics? For instance, if you look at the axis of the South or Mississippi or so forth, you see then a structure of where people met because of the circumstance of survival. Their economy was what brought them together. It wasn't necessarily a racial dynamic, it was more an economical dynamic. And in this situation, suffering through whatever they dealt with and growing and living and surviving this whole situation, born also an expression. And in a way, different pockets of this happen in different places for different reasons, and economy, I think, also plays often a role in how things develop.
I agree that the economics would be one of the factors, but I feel that factor has been pushed in a way to obscure the composite music. And when the first Europeans arrived and met the Native Americans, suddenly we had a fusion. And that fusion was the Genesis fusion for American music. As a scholar, I'm sure that you, more than most, are aware that, for instance, the rhythmic unit genesis of American music came about from African and Irish rhythmic logics. We don't talk that much about the Irish rhythmic logics. Why? Because we've carved out a reality for African Americans responding to the tragedy of slavery and the complexity of American social reality. So different zones have been carved out for so-called minorities or non-European peoples. But in fact, this perception, this perspective, in my opinion, It's not the correct perspective, because men and women from the beginning of time and documentation have vibrated to the same kind of vibrational dynamics, social dynamics. You meet someone, there's a vibration, either it's positive or it's negative. These kind of synergies have always been happening. This is part of the human experience. And that if we would separate ourselves from idiomatic propositions, we can begin to look at how everything is connected and how fortunate we are as human beings to be on a planet where all these different things can happen. Creativity, in my opinion, is like water or eating food. Creativity is part of being healthy. Creativity is part of acknowledging the special experience that we've been having, and creativity is one of the routes that can help the friendly experiencer move through life. And so the history of jazz, the history of classical music, I have serious differences with how the music is taught. I would also say, and add to this, that we're seeing a new generation of creative women, great masters like Mary Halverson, Ingrid Lobrock. But in fact, the great creative women have always been there. They just haven't been talked about.
You just lost a wonderful one, as a matter of fact.
Mary McPartland. And now, after 28 years in academia, I see how it happens. What am I referring to? I'm referring to my disgust with the left and the right, and how the boys' club talks the talk, but when it comes time to walk the walk, I don't see as many classes that includes the contribution of the great women in every time period. And so I started teaching women in creative music for something like 15 years. I've moved away from it now because so much has been found. It's become a subject for specialists.
You were on a subject I was going to bring up anyways, but so I asked the question, and then perhaps it brings up a few other details in this realm to do with education, because it's because you're one semester away from retiring from many years. But how many years altogether?
28 years.
28 years between Wesleyan and Mills College. And in reflection, how do you feel about your own personal role as an educator, and the other thing more generally, the institutional role, such as the ones you taught at? What role do you think they play in the future of the music? In a way, you've already addressed this a little bit, but perhaps you can add a little bit more to that point.
I feel that education has to be reconfigured. In America, Mills College and Wesleyan University are special in the sense that there's more flex options as compared to the traditional university. For myself, the last 28 years has been beautiful in the sense of having opportunities to meet and work with young people. That, for me, has been special. It has also been complex in the sense that being inside of the university, I have no more illusions about the university. I see how it works. And I think the university needs to emphasize bringing in people who are not just technocrats. I do not mean to exclude the technocrats. I love the technocrats. I only mean to say that there needs to be a better balance between technocrats, professors, and artistic, creative professors. I feel that the university needs to become transidiomatic in the way of Wesleyan, where you could, when you were coming up, you studied with Blackwell, you know Sue Marson, you know, you began to learn about world music. I think in America especially, we've come to a point where it won't be possible to transmit the real information if we're only thinking about America. Music is not about America. Music is about manifestation. And we need for our educational institutions to open up, and we need to help the next generation of educators understand that it's okay not to know everything, to be able to admit that you don't know everything. And so then we can really look at what you really know, because there's a lot of masquerading in the university. I'm especially critical of PhD programs. I've been working in this area for 28 years with PhD students and watching how it works. The university needs to recalibrate its synergies to stay relevant, in my opinion. And part of that recalibration would be humility. 2, working in the community. 3, learning the real fundamentals and how to apply those fundamentals to help our young people better understand history as a way to have a better sense of present time and as a platform to help young people look into the future.
You're speaking to the fact that sometimes the PhD candidate is in a sort of isolated world without any real interaction with perhaps the present tense of realities of various things. If we look at just in the field of music alone, they're sort of in this sort of isolated thing, doing all this research and whatever, and coming up with an argument and a thesis about some subject matter. But on the other hand, you're pointing out that there's a lack of connection to the realities of both the world and the music.
I'm saying this: if you don't know what direction you're going in, then any direction will do. If you've never experienced the it of the real-time moment, then theory takes on a value system that sometimes becomes very unhealthy. Theory is what the technocrats rely upon because they can't actually do it themselves. And so suddenly 1 + 1 = 2. But as a musician, composer, you know that it's the number 3, not the number 2. The number 3 gives flex options and transpositional options that transcends dialectic reasoning. And this difference, while on the surface might look not so important, but on the unsurface, it is important. And the difference can be observed through time, where it's like you get a guy who can play like Coltrane in his first 5 years. He plays all of Mr. Coltrane's licks. In the next 10 years, he plays all of the licks, just he can scream like Mr. Coltrane even. But somewhere between the 10th and the 20th year, it's like, well, wait a minute, okay, this guy is a stylist, or this gal is a stylist. We love stylists. But the university should be in the business of teaching the traditionalists, teaching the stylists, and teaching the restructuralists. And in my opinion, the way to approach that is to have a holistic thought unit, which is why in the past 20 years I speak of my music system as I speak of my system as a tricentric thought unit, as a way to start the process of reconfiguring the psychology and the transpositions of the psychology in a way that reflects the experiences of the artists.
In the dimension that you work in quite often, opera is a form of musical presentation and artistic expression that you has always enjoyed, a flexibility in terms of its definition. How do you personally define what opera is? Or given your clear commitment to this as a composer, how does this form fulfill your deeper aspirations of artistic expression?
Opera has been incredibly important to me since I turned 40. As a young guy, however, I did not like opera. I couldn't relate to opera. If there was one guy whose work I hated, it was Richard Wagner. It was just too different for me. When I hit 40 years old, I asked myself this question: why is it that I love the great music of Alban Berg, but I've never given his operas a chance? And so I went and saw Wojciech, and Wojciech turned me upside down. After that, all roads would lead to Richard Wagner. Now,
Did you
my
see the production of the Metropolitan Opera House of Willisau? Was that the one you saw?
it was City Opera.
Oh, City Opera. City Opera, yes, I think I saw this.
It was exhilarating for me to see it. Now, for me, opera is a continuation of my interest in narrative structures, storytelling. What am I saying? I'm saying this. At some point, as I got closer to the 40s, I started experiencing a change. I discovered that intellectual interesting was not enough. Even though I was always interested in the serialists, and of course Stockhausen would become one of my daddies. But I found at 40, I wanted something more than intellectual interesting. And it was at that point that I began to become aware of the importance of storytelling, for instance. The beauty of songs. I've always been a Sinatra, Johnny Mathis, Billy Eckstine, Barbra Streisand kind of guy. And I wanted to look for a way to bring vocal music and song form musics into my work. And so the opera for me, on the third plane, would be opportunity to build structures with narrative logic connections, an opportunity to explore poetic logics, an opportunity to look at three-dimensionality, working with singers who are actors and actresses who are moving in the space, bringing the community together. The light crew comes in from this angle, the stage crew comes from this angle, people working together to achieve one aim. I think opera is great. And who is my hero? Richard Wagner. I see the Trillium Opera Complex system as a post-Wagner expression. I bow to the great man, and I apologize for my ignorant youth. Since the 40s, I've learned a great deal from the great master, and I continue to learn from his music.
What role does ritual, if any, play in your operas that you've written?
Ritual and ceremonial musics is the third tier of the tricentric thought unit. And so the Trillium system was designed based on the I Ching, if I could put it that way. With the I Ching, as you know, you come to it, you ask a question, you throw pennies, and the I Ching gives you a story. And from the story, you will decipher what that means to you, if it has meaning to you.
Right, or to your question, if you throw it.
Yes. Okay, the third tier of my system starts with the triaxiom writings. Remember, the idea of a tricentric thought unit involves philosophy, involves experience, involves a set of ideas, and ritual and ceremonial musics. And so, before answering your question, I go back to the tricentric, the triaxiom writings. The triaxiom writings establishes a subject focus. It takes a secondary focus based on what that subject is, and it has a dialectic in terms of questions and answers. Along with that,
Is it also-
let me finish this. Along with that methodology, I brought in schematics, and the schematics are a reduction of all the arguments. And so the operas, the Trillium opera system, builds a story from a schematic. In other words, Trillium is the living manifestation of the triaxiom writings. That's what I'm trying to say. And so I've tried with my system to create a holistic thought unit where everything connects in different kinds of ways. An approach of this nature was consistent with what was happening with the music anyway. And so Trillium is the fulfillment of the third house in my music. Experience being, let me explain this a little better. Experience on the plane, on the triplane, would be area space logics. Experience would be improvisation or improvisational real-time strategies. And House of the Circle on the third plane would be the triaxiom writings, the philosophy. Going to the rectangle would be ideas, the idea of ideas, architectonic modeling, and ideas as a projection of a possible global reality.
Architectonic models. Structure?
Structure.
In essence.
The structure from solo to the largest degree you want to work in. And then to build models based on those elements. That's what I've tried to do in my own work. To, with the 12 architectonic, 12 sonic geometric propositions, long sound, polarity sounds, trios, or I'll come back to it, but I'll say trios for right now. 4, staccato sounds or schematic sounds. 5, intervallics. 6, sound mass logics. 7, short sounds, quick sounds. 8,
like a vocabulary list, in essence, a grouping of different elements, text. You could look at it as textures, you could look at it as, but different definable areas of musical expression.
Another way of saying it would be 12 building blocks.
Right.
And the 12th house is sub-identity logics. Sub-identity logics in this context means I could bring some composition from the system in, and we can move that through the system. Or if we want to take Johnny Mathis singing Chances Are, we could bring it through house 12. And so this is a model that is transidiomatic. And the elements are transidiomatic and can be put together in different ways in the same way that the quartet began to put together compositions from all over the place.
Right. Let me throw something else at you. Now, it's a slight deviation, but it's related exactly to where you're going. One of the elements of musical construction that I had the pleasure of experiencing through your music was a unique form of modular organization, which is kind of what you're speaking about, which resulted in a rich polyphonic and polyrhythmic musical environment. It's one way of terming it. This musical strategy at the time involved independent assignments, which you at that time called pulse tracks, which we often the bass and drums would do together, or other pairs of the quartet would do.
And I never specify, well, sometimes I specify a particular pulse track, but as we began to move forward with this way of modeling, more and more I said, Gerry, choose something. Mark, you guys...
Right. This was the collective way in which we ended up working to some degree, which is an interesting point as well. But I'm almost there. Simultaneously, you in Maryland might play an independent composition, or one other improvised, and another composition. All these things would happen at the same time. We had different roles. And this was, the interpretation of these compositions were sometimes strict, sometimes loose, sometimes improvising with the material, varying off the theme. I'm curious, could you share how you thought, how these threads of working, this way of working in a very dynamic, you're drawing from a very dynamic and broad resource base. That's really clear when you talk about the opera. It's really clear when you talk about in the way in which you work about the whole tricentric logic system. When you are, it's really curious, in what early formative ways did these ideas of collective thinking, multi-dimensional layers going on at the same time. Where did you find the beginnings of this way of thinking in musical organization? Where in your story, in your longer story?
This is a wonderful question, and thank you for this question. I feel that one of the significant factors of the time and space of the 60s was, as opposed to the 50s, the 50s would have the national music expression. The 60s would have the global music awareness. Suddenly Ravi Shankar, people that we normally did not listen to, would come into our viewpoint.
Right.
We would suddenly start to experience it. You, more than most, would gain early awareness of earth music because we have never been inhibited to just stay with one thing.
Right.
And so for me, there were several things I was looking at. One, I was not interested in denying any aspect of myself, whether it was my love for Cecil Taylor or my love for Paul Desmond. My motto is not based on rejection of anything. My motto is based on affirmation, love of everything. As such, the solo alto saxophone music would be the Genesis laboratory after the first solo concert. What am I saying? I'm saying this. Everything was happening in the ACM. The world was changing. We're experiencing all about different musics. I become a Stockhausen, Xenakis guy. I said, okay, it's time, freedom. The word freedom was always used in the 60s,
Right.
connected to the civil rights. So I decided it was time to do a solo concert because I was so deep into Schoenberg's and Stockhausen's piano music. The first solo concert I did, it was great for 2 or 3 seconds. After that, I was repeating, So suddenly I understood that I'm not interested in freedom, that the freedom that was being proposed in the 60s, in many ways, was not the correct definition of what freedom is. Freedom is, for me, to be free from something, not to be existentially free. And so the second solo concert was the real concert that started my solo music, as I began to divide things up so that I would not bump into the same ideas all the time.
Right.
The 12...
So you differentiated, in a way. This was the beginning of perhaps your forming different vocabularies and thinking, like you mentioned, intervallically, this way or that way. You were defining certain territories, perhaps, so that you could differentiate one thing from another and begin, as you say, to use these have these building blocks that could maybe later be worked in. Yeah.
Yes, differentiation on the vertical scale and the linear scale and the oblique scale. For instance, I tried in the early period always to have, with every solo saxophone syntax, to take that syntax and transpose it to the notated space in the solo piano music. The solo piano music takes the logics from the solo saxophone music and put it in concrete notated space. That was always the function of the solo piano music. And then from there, to expand it into the orchestral space or chamber space or duo space. It would probably be better to say duo space because I'm talking about solo saxophone, solo piano, and then to the number 2, and later to the number 3. And so every logic would be manifested at least in 3 different instances. This is what I am trying to say.
I see. Okay.
And as a result, I created a context for restructural modeling. And that has, that's what really came out of the solo saxophone music for me. The chance to reflect on modeling and then to evolve different contexts and domains of modeling.
Okay. Makes sense to me.
No kidding. And in every case, I learned from the musicians I played from. I mean, it was the Anthony Braxton Quartet, but it was actually really a family, and we learned from one another. I came into the group with clear ideas, some of which didn't work, so we threw those away, and we evolved it. But during the time and space we worked together, we learned from one another. Absolutely. I had never worked with such incredible, super virtuoso musicians who happen to be beautiful people like you guys, and having a chance to work with musicians who could play whatever I write, or who would listen to whatever concept I would come up with and then try to actualize it, was a cosmic blessing. And so I learned from the family of the music, and tried to evolve my work based on what seems to work, what doesn't work. The understanding being that there is such a thing as something works and something does not work. That those operatives are still in place,
right.
just depending on
Well,
what's
I think there was a trust in the group that allowed for you felt comfortable enough with us and your own music, and at that point that things could be allowed to not happen in the conventional sense of improvisation where we just go out and do, but instead that there was a sense of you've just unraveled an evolution of organization in your musical theory.
Yes.
And here, in the way the quartet kind of took that ball and ran with it in a certain, as a group, as a collectively thinking, your music was at the heart of everything that we did. We were playing your compositions, we were using your compositions, but the way in which we interacted with that environment of music
was the family of music.
Yes, and it had a fluidity to it that allowed us to experiment on our own, individually, collectively, on stage, in organization and thinking, rehearsing, or lack of rehearsing.
Or lack of rehearsing.
We found a music together out of this whole thing.
But I would say this: if I had brought musicians into the quartet who didn't have the knowledge base that you guys and one gal, Marilyn, had, it could not have worked. I needed musicians who were students of the music, who had interest in world music, who had interest in the intellectual dynamics of the music, the conceptual dynamics of the music, the musicians who could understand the state of where we were at in that time period, the challenges of that time period. And so the cosmic forces blessed me by bringing me musicians like yourself, sir. People who were and are super brilliant, super dedicated, and exploring themselves, because you are a great composer, separate from me. I mean, you're just a great composer, and I'm not being nice, I'm just looking at what has happened and transpired through time. Time tells the whole tale. You can talk about what you want, but if there's nothing to show for it,
yeah, you gotta do the work.
you have to do the work. And so yes, because of having three extraordinary individuals who believed in me, then I was able to push back on some of the unnecessary controls not needed anymore, because we were looking on top of everything else for different formal models to work with, and models that would allow for composite synergies. So the significance of the quartet, in my opinion, was connected to the significance of that time period, which was the challenge to find fresh models, the challenge to have holism, the challenge to respond to the new technical breakthroughs of that period, and we had to have people who were aware of many different kinds of musics. It was a guy named Gerry Hemingway who turned me on to country music. It was a guy named Gerry Hemingway who said, "Oh, what about this Indian musician here? Do you know this guy?" Oh, Gerry, I don't know him. So I had to learn him. So I was very
What a
lucky.
pleasure to share it all with you.
And
I was
Leo
learning from-
Smith.
Oh, Leo was
Yeah,
was
I mean,
was
he-
one of my guys who opened up my door and said Harry Parch and Chinese Peking opera. Let's listen to that.
Because we
We're
were trying to
interested.
open up to the world that we didn't even know exist.
Exactly.
And suddenly it was no longer a concept. We're hearing the music coming from different directions.
Exactly.
So how to take that information and do something with it as opposed to having new age Indian music or something,
Right.
idiomatic new age music. We weren't interested in that. We were interested in learning from composite reality, but then taking that information and making it our own.
Yes.
And part of making it our own for me was to find out what was my domain and what was not my domain. Because we mentioned Cecil Taylor before and unit structures, more and more it was like, wait a minute, I've got the baddest people on the planet in my group. I don't have to tell these people everything. I'll just say, the principal compositions that we're going to do will be these four, and put some post tracks in, and we'll target a solo for Gerry here, we'll target a solo for Mark here. So we had targeted moments, but we also had vast spaces where everyone could
We would enter
do
the
have
unknown.
different connections.
Yeah, exactly. It was a lovely environment, music making.
Oh, and
I'll never forget it.
and it's documented.
And it's true.
We can go listen to it, and it's not just a thought or a memory. We took care of business. I'm proud of that group, and I'm proud of us as individuals, because everyone came to me with true hearts, and you have true hearts today. Why? Because you're a guy with a true heart.
Hey, give me a hug. That's beautiful. That's enough said. You said it all.
End of
End of it.
It's time for wine.